The insult that shook Sundar the hall was filled with bright lights and restless energy. The kind of energy that comes when powerful people gather, and every word spoken might make headlines around the world. It was an evening when leaders from politics, business, and technology came together in America to speak about the future of innovation. Sundar Pichai sat quietly at the edge of the stage, his calm eyes watching, his hands resting in his lap. He was not the kind of man who demanded attention with his voice. He had always believed that respect was not something shouted into the air, but something earned quietly, through hard work, through humility, through patience. But the silence of that moment would not last long. Suddenly the atmosphere changed. Donald Trump, known for his sharp words and unfiltered speeches, stepped onto the podium. People leaned forward because they knew that whenever Trump spoke, something unexpected was about to happen. He began his speech with the usual mix of humor and power, talking about America's greatness and the need for strength. The audience applauded, but then his tone shifted, and his words grew sharper. "These immigrants," he said with a mocking smile, "they come here, they take our jobs, they build their companies, but they forget where they come from. Some of them don't even belong here, and maybe they should remember that." The crowd murmured, some laughed, but many looked uncomfortable. Then he turned slightly, his hand sweeping toward Sundar's direction, and he added words that cut deeper than knives. "Look at them. Look at these Indian guys running big companies. Is this the future of America? Is this what we want?" The room froze. Cameras clicked. Reporters whispered to one another. Sundar felt the weight of every eye on him. Inside, his heart pounded, but on the outside, he remained still. He had faced insults before, growing up in Chennai in a modest house where he shared a single room with his family, where he sometimes studied by the dim light of a kerosene lamp. He knew what it meant to be underestimated, to be told you were not enough. But this was different. This was public. This was meant to humiliate not just him, but millions of immigrants who had left behind their homes to build new lives in America. For a moment, Sundar thought of his father, who worked so hard in a factory, who taught him that dignity is never given by others. It is something you carry inside yourself. He thought of his mother, who had sacrificed her dreams so her children could study. He thought of his journey from that small house to the heart of Silicon Valley, to becoming the CEO of one of the most powerful companies in the world. And as he thought, his calm face revealed nothing, but deep inside, something was building, something that would soon change the way people remembered this night. The audience waited. Would Sundar respond? Would he stay silent? Many in the room assumed he would not dare speak against a man like Trump. After all, power has its shadows, and few risk standing in those shadows unafraid. But Sundar knew that silence sometimes becomes acceptance, and he could not let that insult define who he was or what immigrants stood for. When his turn finally came to speak, he walked slowly toward the podium. His steps were soft, but the hall was so quiet that even the sound of his shoes seemed to echo. He stood behind the microphone, his hands resting gently on the edge of the stand. He looked at the audience, then at Trump, and then back to the crowd. For a long moment he said nothing. The silence stretched, and tension filled the room. Then in a soft, steady voice he began, "I was born far away in India. I grew up in a home where my family did not always have what we needed, but we had dreams, and those dreams brought me here. America gave me the chance to learn, to work, and to build something that could serve billions of people around the world. I am here not because I took someone's place, but because I worked hard to create my own place." His words were not shouted. They were not angry. They were quiet, almost gentle, but they carried a strength that silenced even the whispers in the room. He spoke about immigrants not as outsiders, but as people who had always been part of the American story. He reminded them that America itself was built by immigrants who carried dreams from distant lands. And then with a calm smile, he looked directly at Trump and said, "Respect is not given by where you are born. Respect is earned by what you give to the world." The room gasped. Reporters scrambled to write down his words. Some in the crowd stood and clapped, though others stayed frozen, stunned by the courage of his reply. Trump shifted in his chair, his face tightening, but Sundar did not waver. He spoke for 10 minutes, every sentence carrying humility, every story carrying truth. He talked about resilience, about kindness, about how strength is not measured in power over others, but in the ability to lift others up. And when he finished, he bowed his head slightly, stepped back, and returned to his seat. The hall erupted into applause, some hesitant, some thunderous, but all recognizing that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Yet even as the applause rang, Sundar knew this was not the end. He knew that his words would spread far beyond this room, into headlines, into homes, into the hearts of millions. He also knew that speaking out against a man like Trump came with consequences. The story was just beginning. That night, as he returned to his hotel, his phone buzzed with messages. Some praised him, some warned him, and some carried threats that made his assistants nervous. But Sundar was calm. He looked out of his window at the lights of the city and whispered to himself, "This is bigger than me." And deep inside, he felt a storm rising. A storm that would test not only his strength but also his very soul. The question was no longer whether Sundar had replied to an insult. The question was what would happen next. The storm after the reply the next morning, newspapers across America carried Sundar's words on their front pages. Television channels replayed the moment again and again. The quiet voice of a man who had stood up to insult with dignity. Many called it powerful. Some called it brave, and a few dismissed it as unnecessary. But no one ignored it. In coffee shops, on buses, and in offices, people debated what Sundar had said. Was it a simple reminder of respect, or was it something far greater? For Sundar, the day began with silence. He sat by the window of his hotel room, sipping tea the way he used to back home in Chennai, letting the steam rise gently in front of his face. He thought of his childhood again, of the evenings when his father would return tired from work, but still find time to ask about his studies. He thought of the long walks to school, of the crowded classrooms, of the days when he had to wait weeks before his family could afford a telephone. Those memories were not weakness. They were the foundation of everything he had become. And now, standing in America with the world watching, he felt those memories guiding him like a compass. But outside the calm of his room, the storm was growing. Trump's supporters flooded social media with anger, calling Sundar ungrateful, calling him names meant to cut deep. His assistants showed him the threats pouring in, messages filled with rage. Some even said he should leave the country. Sundar listened quietly, nodding, but inside he felt no fear. Instead, he felt sadness. Sadness that words of humility could awaken such hostility. Yet at the same time, something else was happening. Thousands of immigrants, students, workers, and families began to share their own stories online. They spoke of long nights in gas stations, of saving coins to send children to college, of carrying the weight of two worlds, their old home and their new one. Many said Sundar's reply gave them courage, gave them pride. For the first time in a long while, they felt seen. That evening, Sundar attended a private dinner with business leaders. The atmosphere was tense. Some praised him, saying his words had brought dignity to the immigrant community. Others warned him to stay quiet from now on, saying politics was dangerous and that men with power could crush even the strongest CEO. Sundar listened, never interrupting. But when they finished, he spoke softly. "If truth makes us uncomfortable, then silence will destroy us." The room fell silent, his words heavy in the air. Some avoided his eyes. Others nodded slowly, understanding that he was not a man to be swayed by fear. But as the night went on, Sundar received a message that changed everything. It was not from a friend, not from a colleague, not even from a supporter. It was from someone he had not expected, an anonymous message that simply said, "They will not forgive what you said. Be ready." The words chilled him, not because they carried threat, but because they carried certainty. Sundar closed his eyes, realizing that his reply had not just stirred emotions, it had awakened something larger, something dangerous, something that would follow him in the days to come. When he looked out of the window again, the city lights seemed different, sharper, almost warning him of the battles ahead. He knew that the real test was not behind him. It was waiting quietly in the shadows, and the question now was no longer about words. It was about survival. Shadows around Sundar the days that followed were not calm. Sundar returned to California, back to the familiar streets of Silicon Valley, but nothing felt familiar anymore. The office, once a place of quiet focus and steady progress, now carried an unusual energy. Cameras lingered outside. Reporters waited in the lobby and employees whispered in hallways. Some looked at him with pride, others with concern and a few with fear. He could see it in their eyes. The weight of his words had spread far beyond a single speech. Each morning, Sundar read the letters arriving from across the world. One came from a young student in Texas who wrote, "I felt ashamed when people mocked my accent, but after hearing you, I know I should never hide who I am." Another came from an old man in New York who had once arrived on a ship with nothing but a suitcase. He wrote, "Your words reminded me of the strength I carried when I was young." Sundar read every letter, letting the voices of strangers remind him that his reply was no longer about him alone. It had become a mirror of their lives. But alongside those voices came darker ones. Anonymous threats filled his inbox. Messages warned him to watch his step, to stay silent, to remember that no one challenges power without paying a price. Some emails carried chilling details as if the sender was closer than he thought. His security team grew anxious. They urged him to reduce his public appearances, to avoid walking alone, to travel with guards. Sundar, however, resisted at first. He was not a man of fear. But late one evening, as he left his office, he noticed a black car parked across the street. It was there again the next day. And the day after that. He told himself it might be coincidence, but his instincts whispered otherwise. The car never moved until he did. Its windows were dark, its engine humming softly like a shadow waiting to follow. Suddenly he remembered the anonymous message. "They will not forgive what you said. Be ready." It was no longer just a warning. It was beginning to feel like a prophecy. In the middle of this storm, Sundar's family became his deepest worry. He thought of his wife, his children, their simple life that he had always tried to protect from the chaos of his role. Now he feared that the chaos had found its way to them. One night, while he was helping his daughter with her homework, he caught himself glancing at the window again and again, as if expecting someone to appear outside. The next day, during a meeting with senior executives, Sundar's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and froze. It was a photograph. The picture showed his home, taken from across the street. Beneath it were 4 words. "We are watching you." He did not show the image to anyone in the room, but his hands tightened around the phone. He smiled calmly, answered questions, and finished the meeting as if nothing had happened. But inside, his heart raced. This was no longer about politics, no longer about public debate. This was personal. This was direct. That night, as he sat alone in his study, the city lights glowing faintly through the window, Sundar asked himself the question that had begun to haunt him. Should he stay silent to protect his family? Or should he continue to speak, knowing that every word could put them in greater danger? The silence in the room was heavy, pressing on his chest. He closed his eyes, trying to hear his father's voice, the one that used to tell him, "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to stand even when you are afraid." But just as he opened his eyes, his phone buzzed again. This time it was not a photograph. It was a video. He pressed play and his face drained of color. The video was of his children walking home from school. Fear inside the home. The video played only for a few seconds, but those seconds stretched like hours inside Sundar's chest. His children were laughing, their school bags bouncing on their shoulders, unaware that a camera lens was watching them. The recording ended abruptly, replaced by silence. But the silence itself was heavier than any threat. Sundar sat frozen, his hand trembling slightly as he held the phone. He was not a man who showed fear easily. Yet in that moment, fear crept into him like ice through cracks in glass. He locked his study door and watched the video again, searching for clues. The angle suggested someone close, maybe across the street, maybe following behind. He replayed it again and again, but there were no faces. No license plates, only the proof that his private world was no longer private. The one thing he had tried hardest to protect, his family, was now vulnerable. Later that night, he sat with his wife. He did not want to show her the video, but he knew he could not carry this weight alone. When she saw it, her eyes widened, her hand covering her mouth. "We can't stay like this," she whispered. "The children cannot live under shadows." Sundar took her hand, his voice low and steady. "I will not let harm touch them. I promise." Yet even as he spoke, a voice deep inside him asked if he could keep that promise. The next morning, security guards stood outside his home. Black cars followed his children's school bus. The house that once echoed with laughter now felt like a cage, with every door locked, every curtain drawn. The children asked why men in suits were standing outside, why reporters were always waiting at the corner. Sundar gave them gentle answers, but he could see confusion in their eyes. Still, work demanded his attention. At the office, meetings filled his schedule, but whispers filled the corridors. Some employees admired his strength. Others feared the consequences of his defiance. One senior advisor even pulled him aside and said, "You have already made your point. Step back before this turns into something none of us can control." Sundar listened but said nothing. Inside, he knew he was standing at a crossroads. Silence might protect his family, but silence would also betray the millions who saw hope in his voice. That evening, as he walked out of his office, he saw the same black car again. This time, its window rolled down slightly, just enough for him to notice. A hand reached out, dropping a small envelope onto the ground before the car drove away. Sundar picked it up slowly, his pulse quickening. Inside was a single sheet of paper with only one sentence written in bold letters. Next time, we will not just watch. He stood under the fading sky, the paper trembling in his hand as the city lights flickered to life. Everything around him seemed louder. The hum of engines, the footsteps of strangers, the clicking of cameras, each sound carrying the possibility of danger. When he returned home, he found his daughter asleep on the couch, her school books scattered around her. He knelt beside her, brushing her hair gently away from her face, and for the first time in years, tears filled his eyes. He whispered softly, "I never wanted this for you. I only wanted you to grow without fear." But the truth was clear. Fear had already entered their lives, and the choice before him was no longer just about his dignity. It was about whether he would retreat to protect his family or rise higher, knowing that every step forward could cost him the peace of his own home. As he turned off the lights and stood in the quiet darkness, his phone buzzed again. Another message appeared, but this time it was not a video or a threat. It was a single line sent from an unknown number. "If you want answers, meet us tomorrow, alone." The meeting in the shadows, the message haunted Sundar all night. He lay awake in his bed, the glow of the city seeping faintly through the curtains, his thoughts restless and heavy. Who were they? What answers could they possibly offer? And why had they chosen him alone? Every instinct told him it was dangerous, perhaps even a trap, but a stronger instinct whispered that ignoring it would only deepen the fear surrounding his family. Sunrise came slowly, painting the sky in pale orange, and Sundar made his choice. He would go, he told no one. Not his wife, not his assistants, not his security team. Instead, he slipped into the early morning streets dressed simply, blending with the quiet rhythm of joggers and workers heading out for the day. He drove himself, his hands steady on the wheel, though his heart was not. The address in the message led him far from Silicon Valley's shining towers, down narrow streets lined with warehouses that seemed forgotten by time. He parked outside a rusted gate. The silence there was thick, broken only by the distant cry of a bird. He hesitated, his fingers resting on the steering wheel before finally stepping out. The air smelled of metal and dust. He pushed the gate open and walked inside. A man was waiting in the shadows of the warehouse, tall, with tired eyes, dressed in plain clothes that revealed nothing of who he was. Sundar stopped a few steps away, his voice calm, though his pulse raced. "You sent me the message." The man nodded slowly. "Yes, and I sent the warnings too. You needed to know the danger is real." Sundar's jaw tightened. "Why show me my children? Why frighten them?" The man looked away, shame flickering across his face. "Because fear is the only language they understand. Those who are after you. They are not only angry at your words, they are afraid of what your words can build. If people like you speak with courage, more will rise. And if more rise, the power they hold will crumble." The words sank deep. Sundar realized this was larger than a personal insult. It was about silencing voices before they could grow into movements. The man leaned closer, lowering his voice. "They have people everywhere. In business, in politics, in media, you are being watched not because you replied to an insult, but because your reply touched something they fear, the truth that immigrants are not outsiders but builders of the very nation they claim to protect." Sundar listened, his mind racing. He had always believed in quiet strength, in progress through persistence, not conflict. But now he saw that silence might not protect anyone. The man handed him a small envelope. "Inside are names. People who want to help you. People who believe your voice matters. But know this. The more you speak, the closer the storm will come to your home." Before Sundar could ask more, the man stepped back into the shadows. The warehouse door creaked, and by the time Sundar turned, he was gone. Sundar stood alone, the envelope in his hand, the weight of it pressing against his palm like a stone. He drove back in silence, the city coming into view again, its streets busy, its people unaware of the battles being fought quietly behind the curtain of daily life. At home, his wife looked at him with questioning eyes, but he said nothing, only handing her a gentle smile that hid the turmoil inside. Later, when the house grew quiet, he opened the envelope. There were 3 names written on a single sheet of paper. 3 strangers, 3 allies perhaps, or 3 traps. His phone buzzed again, another message flashing on the screen. It contained only 2 words this time. Choose wisely. The choice and the voices. Sundar stared at the 3 names for a long time, as if the letters on the page were alive and waiting for his decision. Each name carried unknown weight, an ally or a betrayal, a step toward truth or a step into danger. For hours he sat in silence, remembering the faces of his children, the pride in his father's eyes, the hope in the letters people had sent him. He realized that this choice was not about him alone. It was about the millions who had no microphone, no podium, no shield to protect them. If he stepped back, their silence would grow heavier. If he stepped forward, he would carry their voices with his own. The following week, Sundar traveled quietly to meet the first name on the list, a professor who had studied immigrant movements in America. She welcomed him into her small office, walls lined with books and papers stacked high. She spoke of history, of how every generation of immigrants had been tested, insulted, pushed aside. Yet each time they rose again, stronger and more determined. She told him, "Your words matter because they are not just yours. They belong to those who cannot stand where you stand." Sundar listened, and for the first time since the storm began, he felt clarity. He then met the second person, a journalist who had risked his career to expose corruption and injustice. The man looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. "They will try to silence you," he said. "They will use fear, wealth, even lies. But truth has one power they cannot control. It echoes. Once released, it does not die. It travels from ear to ear, heart to heart, and it changes people." Sundar nodded slowly, feeling the truth of those words. The third name remained a mystery. Sundar delayed that meeting, unsure if he was ready. But fate decided for him. One night, as he left his office, a woman stepped out of the shadows. She was the third name. Her voice was calm, but her words cut deep. "You are not the first they have threatened, and you will not be the last. But you have something rare. People listen to you. You can choose to protect yourself, or you can choose to protect everyone by refusing to be silent." She handed him a small notebook, filled with testimonies from immigrants across the country. "Read these," she said, "and then decide who you are." That night, Sundar sat at his desk reading story after story. A boy who worked nights in a gas station to pay for college. A woman who left her homeland to build a safer life for her children. A man who endured years of insult just to keep his job and feed his family. Page after page, voices filled with pain but also filled with resilience. Sundar felt the weight of their hope pressing against him, urging him not to step back. The next day, he made his choice. He walked onto a stage at a global conference, cameras flashing, the world watching. His voice was steady, but inside him burned a quiet fire. "I was told to be afraid. I was told to be silent. But I cannot. Because silence does not protect us, it only protects those who insult and divide. I stand here not for myself, but for every immigrant who carries 2 homes in their heart. I stand for the dignity of work, the dignity of dreams, the dignity of respect." The hall erupted in applause, but Sundar did not raise his hands in victory. He simply bowed his head, knowing that the journey ahead would not be easy. Yet in that moment he felt something shift. The fear that had haunted his home began to fade, replaced by something stronger. The unshakable belief that words born of humility and truth could outlast any threat. Outside, the storm did not vanish. Those who opposed him still whispered, still plotted, still watched. But Sundar no longer carried their shadow alone. His reply had become a movement, a spark in the hearts of millions. And though the road ahead was uncertain, he knew one truth with absolute clarity. The power of kindness, respect, and resilience could not be silenced.